The reason I decided to produce my own work had many contributing factors. My agent flopped. I paid multiple companies multiple sums of money to raise my ratings on the search engines, and the website product I received was inferior to what I could have developed myself. The road to being in control of my own efforts was rocky, yet through it all I kept writing. There was no indication that I would grow up to write and narrate books. From an early age I wanted to be a baseball player. I lived, ate, and breathed baseball. The 1950s was a different era. The Second World War had just ended less than a decade before. Many kids in the 1950s were playing war, and that meant emulating the troops who defeated Nazi Germany and the Empire of Japan. In our backyard war games, we were the good guys and they were the bad guys. Or they were the bad guys and we were the good guys. Something was wrong in the world and we would fight before supper to overcome evil. Sounds like a good story. It was the 1950s and westerns were all over television. Westerns had heroes and villains. Justice and courage were the mantras of the day. In all these westerns, the values of right and wrong were preached across America, and freedom was a God-given right. I didn't know it, but those qualities also make for a good plot. In 1958, President Eisenhower established the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. The first 7 astronauts were national heroes. Suddenly, the heavens opened up for me, and on cold winter nights, I'd peer into space with my telescope. Wonder is an essential element that easily powers a novel. Not all stories have happy endings. We were at our monthly junior high school dance when our principal walked on stage and the music stopped. I didn't know what he was about to say, but it would tremendously influence my life. President Kennedy has been shot by an assassin in Dallas, Texas. I ask you to pray for Mrs. Kennedy and his children. Decades later, I would write 4 novels, searching as I was on that November afternoon for the reason this president was dead. There were clues that I might be writing. Every week in class, we'd receive the next round of 20 spelling words. I hated spelling, and that was before spell check. I had something better to do. I would construct a narrative in my head, keeping the words in order until I had a story. Nobody ever asked to listen to my story, but I did hear complaints for me to finish my spelling. In the 5th grade, we were instructed to make a project for certain regions of the country. My area was the North Central states. Today you can download what you need to know and put something together quickly. Not so back then. My mother provided the stamps and I had to write the letters. Emails weren't invented. The letters went to the state capitals or whatever department would send you information. Then you'd wait and wait and wait some more. But it was exciting to get something in the outside mailbox. My project was 87 pages, pictures pasted with articles and various state trinkets. I like constructing books. I can't believe how my 8th grade teacher would put up with my clever wordplay and smart aleck remarks. Maybe he saw something else when, after a snippy remark, he walked up to me in the first row and said of my remark, "That wasn't humor, Mr. Fitton, it was wit." Wit. An ability to say or write things that are clever and usually funny. My favorite teacher in high school was not only witty, but clever and knowledgeable. Yes, he redlined the hell out of my essays and corrected my grammar. He would, to my chagrin, write in the column, "Not bad for a first draft," sending me into a tizzy. He did what no other teacher had done, however. Let my words flow. This is an important part of writing anything. If you're stymied with total grammatical perfection of your first draft, you've limited your passion and purpose. Both my mother and father love history and brought my brother and me on extended trips around the country to historic places. We were at Gettysburg for the centennial celebration. To get to these places, you had to take a journey. Forget about car DVD players or smartphones in your lap. I was enthralled looking out the window as the journey progressed. I liked the journey. Star Trek, the original series. I confess, I missed the beginning episodes of Star Trek's first season because I was concentrating on playing football. One Thursday night, I turned the channel and the Corbomite maneuver was beamed at me from deep space. Holy Hallberg 917G. I was more than hooked. Decades of trivia followed, episodes being played untold number of times, quoting dialogue and winning passes to Star Trek movies. The green-eyed reel-to-reel tape recorder. One day I walked into my friend's house and this bird, a minor bird to be precise, was babbling, "Hello, you old crow," throughout the house. You never know what was going to show up in his house. Then, way back then, there was this big, bulky box with a glowing green light and mylar tape threaded through a recording head from clear plastic reels. It was magic. Magic indeed to play back reality. I know in this hyper-tech society it's difficult to understand that fascination. Not too much later, I bought a 3.5-inch reel-to-reel portable and recorded everyone and everything and brought my friends into the act. We pretended to have a radio station, WOFI, and performed parodies such as the Boston Strangler, Albert DeSalvo, being arrested by one of our friends. We parodied anyone we knew in our small town, including an episode of Jeopardy! That spotlighted local notables. We upped the ante by imitating Peyton Place and produced a comedic rendering of our close friends. How they remained friends is a mystery to me. I recorded travel logs of everywhere I went, from battlefields to national parks. I even had the FBI seize my recorder on a tour of their building in Washington, D.C. From Custer's Last Stand to Antietam Creek, it's now on MP3 and hard drives and just a click away. My fascination with audio becomes very important in my writing future. On the road to writing. I was 19 years old and unhappy at college. Dispirited is a more accurate word. I'm hardcore partying and about to take the sharp turn to Losersville. I did a lot of audio diaries, complete with music, all of which I chucked in a dumpster in California years later. I wrote minimal poetry, which needed work, and had a wild vision, no drugs, of traveling into a world where a multitude of people would float by in a darkened morass. I engaged the thought of writing what I had imagined. Then again, it was probably time to go join my drinking buddies at George's Cafe in the city. I jettisoned college and worked for a while before I applied to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. I was accepted and left my hometown. I took a full 3-credit course on science fiction. Getting 3 credits for a sci-fi course was astounding. I did not have the writing bug or plans to be an author of anything. My major, formed by myself and my advisors, was American Studies, a combination of American history and American government and politics. Keep that American history in mind when I start writing the time travel novels. So there I am, at UMass, in a course on mythology of Native Americans, and we were assigned to write a couple of pages about the meaning and motif of the American Indian. I didn't know it, but I was at a pivotal point. I took out the old Smith Corona portable and began punching out a story from my notes and assigned readings. Oh my God, what was happening? I felt the same as I did long-distance running, where everything flows away and the world disappears. I completed a couple more drafts and thought it was pretty good. I just had no idea where this would lead. The paper was returned to me not only with glowing praise, but with substantial respect by the professor and detailed in writing. I entitled it The Legend of the Seasons, as told by the old man. It's a freebie on my site. I would stay in Amherst for another 6 years, and as summer approached, I began writing a Star Trek novel. I heavily relied on The Making of Star Trek by Stephen E. Whitfield and Gene Roddenberry, which allowed me to acquire the mechanical aspects of writing Star Trek. My good friend, a Star Trek aficionado, read the manuscript and liked it. I made inquiries and finally found Louis, the literary agent. He liked the book, enough to have me meet him at his agency in New York City. The manuscript would be called The Apex of Power and was sent to the major paperback publishers, including Bantam Books. All these years later, I can see the flaws in the flow of the book, and will call it one of my bumpy road manuscripts. and I strayed away from the Paramount storylines and parameters, but not bad for a first attempt. The audio of this manuscript is in the freebie section on my website. While still retaining Louis, and with his encouragement, I wrote my first independent novel called The Red Light District. It was not what the title implies. The Red Light District was an area in Arizona where a top-secret project took place. The book had a classic maniacal scientist, time travel, and the threat of involving the President of the United States. Louis went over the changes but liked the manuscript. Again, it made the rounds to the publishing houses with positive feedback but no sale. Still typing on the Smith Corona Portable, I produced A Noble Experiment and did a good job with 2 alien races, time travel, and a phony UFO investigator, as well as a pesky reporter. A Noble Experiment was read independently with great reviews. But I was rolling the dice and should have sought a more critical evaluation of the mechanics of the work. What followed was the bottom line, stressing overpopulation, after a lecture by the renowned Isaac Asimov at UMass. Also, the concept of an average person confronting world problems in the bottom line was unique. Absolute Zero was a book that detailed a virus that shut down the human race. That also sits on the shelf. With this book, I learned how to do research from my material at the 26-story library at UMass. And instead of a Smith Corona Portable, I had a Smith Corona Selectric typewriter. At this juncture, I began to grow upset with Louis' efforts. I can see now how these early books did not need to make the rounds. What they required was some repair. The repair ticket, better description, useless repetition, proper placement of action in the sentence, utilize Anglo-Saxon verbs, focus on paragraph construction. Memo from Louis.
Bob, you need to write horror. That's what's selling.
No. What I needed was better editing and repair. But I wrote my other face anyways. Tiny bright creatures take over the bodies of residents of a northern New England town. The action is gruesome. I think without the gore I would have been proud of the work, yet the threat of bodily harm and even the threat of death is Hitchcockian. Fear rather than gruesome. Carl Sagan, wonderment, brilliance, describes the man who opened up science in the cosmos in the 1970s, and that was the name of the series. I was enamored with Sagan's presentation, and even today, the science and quest for knowledge, past and future, inundates my writing. Joseph Campbell. Follow your bliss, said Joseph Campbell, and I did. I was hooked on writing, expressed in prose and some poetry, but I had to make a living. But as I wrote, I was always aware that the hero, as Campbell said, is always ready for the adventure. From New England to California, I managed to nix Louis from my thoughts and focused on short stories and novellas. Channel 5 in Los Angeles had marathons of The Twilight Zone, a show that I liked from an early age. Most of the work was written by Rod Serling, whom I idolized. The marathon came at an apropos time because I was able to view The Twilight Zone, each episode with an analytical eye. At the same time, now with a fantastic outside sales job around LA, I began to work on XB 234, a gargantuan novel. Later this novel was called The Ram Dama's Kingdom. My travels to Florida to see the first shuttle launch and the subsequent landings at Edwards Air Force Base, home of the X-15, seeped into this book. So did the outright obedience of the people of Jonestown. The Ram Dama character was a lifelong alien who had a violent past, and his future was not too serene either. Having the dimensional doors provided intriguing possibilities in this book, and the time travel aspect knitted the plot together. Just to get the manuscript bound was a feat. Off it went to New York City. I know that you know that I knew, and know that I should have ditched Louis long before XB 234. And you're 100% right. My problem with representation is I always had more material and was excited about my latest effort. I just kept writing and sent the material out because I figured it would get to a publishing house. While still in California, I began to work on a complicated novel called Sojourn. Back to New England and writing conferences. She had a newspaper clipping for the Cape Cod Writers Conference that she handed me when I met her. I made the decision as time went on to attend my first Cape Cod Writers Conference. I have all the notebooks. Of course, my writing improved. After a 3-year hiatus, I continued the work of Sojourn, now reworked and filled with autobiographical material. A note about Sojourn and computers. Before I owned a laptop or any computer, I would use a special pencil and yellow line paper to write Sojourn as I parked off-road, after work or at lunch. In the late 90s, my friend suggested I get off the typewriter and onto a computer. I thought that was a nutty idea. Can you believe it? Why, I don't know. But he sent me an IBM XT. My production went off the charts with a lot less frustration. I was incredibly fortunate to have Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game, review and critique my work. Card also was an instructor and deluged us with the mechanics of the craft of writing. When he said, "You obviously know how to write," I knew I had made progress. I later studied screenplay writing, but having Cape Cod writer Sally Gunning's course in her critique of a Matthias Jones book that became Deader Than Dead helped me avoid common pitfalls. She did like the idea of Matthias Jones noticing the car make creaking noises as most cars do when the engine is just shut off. Jones realized the subject was lying about being home. Tom Sawyer was the head writer for Murder, She Wrote. You don't get much luckier than to have this guy slice and dice your work. Sawyer stressed the idea of outlining everything before writing any work. My very next book, The Ice of Triton, was outlined first and the story flowed nicely. I'm impelled to insert kudos to Stephen King. King's book, On Writing, is to writing what the Chilton's Guide is to auto repair. Here's what Simon & Schuster says about On Writing. Part memoir, part masterclass by one of the best-selling authors of all time. This superb volume is a revealing and practical view of the writer's craft, comprising the basic tools of the trade every writer must have. So whatever you're writing, even if you couldn't care less about writing, get this book. Change of genre in the 90s. Harry Cobb, Intra-Solar System Investigator. The House series, Alone in a House, Far, Far Away from Home. Downsize, Back to the Past in Barkley, Idaho. Green Haze, Craig Grafton series. Galactic Command, Commander John Ross and his crew in the distant future. Two more very important series. The Matthias Jones series. This series has the greatest number of books. Murder, Mayhem, and Monkey Business. His father was an investigator who was murdered. Matthias Jones became an athlete and a coach, but he and Coco Stefani solved his father's murder. Hamilton College on the coast of New Hampshire hired him to coach sports, but getting into murder investigation remains his passion. He knows the cops and the district attorney, Herbert Lane, hates his guts. He's best buds with Coco, a major underworld figure, and a good friend of parish priest, Father Jim Gallagher. Jones's persistence gains him the upper hand over the cops and the DA, and the murderer. Hamilton, New Hampshire is the fictional New England town located along the New Hampshire coast and bordering the larger city of Prince William. Originally settled by the Fletcher and Hall families, the town is most known for Hamilton College. The college is controlled by the powerful Fletcher family and funded in nefarious ways. The town is littered with eccentric and quite odd citizens with a radically aberrant view of reality. Sometimes when it comes to murder, the locals are dead on. The Jones series started out very serious, but my humor and silliness soon overtook the plots. The town is a conglomeration of places I've lived. The weirdness of the characters surrounding the normal Matthias Jones has its roots in Hogan's Heroes, Newhart, Green Acres. The town that I grew up in had an assortment of characters, but most of the Jones characters are people I've encountered in outside sales. The Patch Kincaid series, certainly my most historically poignant novel. The Kennedy Paradox began as Redshift. The novel had a twist at the end. Because Patch Kincaid went back in time, President Kennedy was killed. I left it at that. I have an interest in the Kennedy assassination that intensified when Mark Lane showed the Zapruder film at UMass. Further developments with the House Select Committee in the late 70s, as well as the dramatic release of millions of documents by the AARB in the 90s, tempted me to change redshift. Jim Cahill became Patch Kincaid. I ramped up the research of the Bay of Pigs invasion and the multitude of characters involved in the assassination, thus providing a framework of the reasons why Kennedy was killed and room for a sequel. That sequel, Return to Dallas, took almost 2 years to research, write, and footnote. I wanted everything I said about JFK's death to be sourced and backed up. The final book of the series, American Justice, Volume 1 and 2, explores the government's full-court press of Jim Garrison's pursuit of the truth, and it delves into the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. I have a separate website for the Kennedy assassination. More time travel novels written in that time. When you're dead, you're dead. About a DA who goes out to become a marshal in the Old West for justice. I've seen the future, about the New York 1939 World's Fair. Once in a Lifetime, the 1927 Yankees, and a whole plot about aliens above the earth. A World Without Her, Peter Sturgis losing his wife to a multiverse, separate reality. Time Portal Alpha, going back in time at the time of the Great Pipeline bringing water to LA. The Butterfly in the Deadly Storm. Catherine is seeing dreams of a murder back in Plymouth, Massachusetts in the 1950s. Post Louis. Louis finally admitted after I tracked him down that he had not sent out many of my manuscripts for a long time. Enough said. I linked up with a West Coast firm that helped me get my books sold on my personal website. We actually sold a goodly amount of books in Palm Pilot files, a precursor of Kindle, and I made the transition to print on demand, which I buttressed with web and search engine placement by using companies out of Chicago and Miami. When Amazon competed with iUniverse, it was a no-brainer to take everything over to Amazon. I would have control of everything I was writing, and it would be posted on Amazon. I took an early retirement and began the arduous task of upgrading and further editing over 40 books. As an outside salesperson, I met people every day, but now I was locked down to improving my work. I designed all of my website, did the graphics for the covers and background, and then something strange happened when some of my books became available on the web. One of my techniques for proofing involved reading out loud what I had written. The late Harlan Ellison once said the only person who should be verbalizing your characters is the person who created them. So I did. I reached back into all the experience I had making sound recordings and parodies as a hobby. And now I had wonderful software and a very expensive digital recorder. All of my books are recorded in audio, some with sound effects. And the best part about all this, it's so much fun creating the books and the audiobooks.